welcome back. This is episode 2, All Things Horse Farms. I'm your host, Kelly Martin with Home and Farms Realty, and today we're going to talk about how to design the perfect horse barn. Real question is, can there actually be a perfect horse barn? I guess if you were working with an unlimited budget, you could build what you would perceive to be your perfect horse barn, but I could almost guarantee that when you got done with that, you would have wished you did something different. But again, maybe if you had an unlimited budget, you would just do it different then. But let's talk about in reality, most people who are going to be building their dream barn do have to build it within a budget. So let's talk about that. What is a dream barn? I'd love to hear from you guys. What is your dream barn? I know everybody's perspective is a little different, so make sure you leave comments below, questions. Tell us about your dream barn. Subscribe. Please leave us a review. We want to hear from you guys. We're trying to build up our listeners. This is brand new for us. We have just started this podcast, and this is only episode 2. So share us, tell all your friends about us. But we specialize in horse farms. So we know a lot about horse farms. We've built horse farms. We sell horse farms. We know an extensive amount. So let's get into how to design your perfect horse barn. Well, that is definitely going to be a personal thing. But the first thing you're definitely going to want to do is figure out what you need inside of your barn. So how many horses do you have? How many stalls will you need? Are they tiny horses, or are they regular size horses, or are they oversized horses? So let's start with the basic. A basic stall is going to be a 12-foot by 12-foot stall. That is your normal standard stall. Some people do a 10 by 10, and that's fine for a breed that's smaller, ponies, tiny horses. And then some people do a mixture of 12 by 10, but for a standard size, it's going to be 12 by 12. So the first thing you're going to want to do is figure out how many stalls you're going to need, and if a 12 by 12 will work, or if you need to go a 12 by 10, or some people do oversized stalls where it's a 12 by 16, and that's going to be for your larger breeds, maybe your hunter jumpers. Some people like to use that for their brood mares. Other people like to just take 2 stalls and make them into one for the time that their brood mares are having babies. So that's the question you're going to want to answer first is, how many stalls do I need? The next thing you're going to want to know is, what else do you need in your barn? What are your must-haves? Do you want a wash bay? Or can you have a wash bay outside? Are you in a warmer climate that most of the time it doesn't rain, and having the wash bay outside with a hitching post is fine? Or maybe you want a wash bay outside and one inside. You also want to think about your feed room, having a feed room in there where you can lock up your feed and keep it away from other animals. Maybe if a horse gets out, rodents, anything like that, you want to be able to keep your feed away from other animals. Also, like your medicines, anything that you're going to need for your horses. And the other thing that you might want to consider is a tack room. A good tack room, you're able to keep it maybe away from other areas so the dust doesn't get on everything. It'll probably still get a little bit dusty, but when your tack is out in the barn aisle and you're sweeping, or you're using a leaf blower, we use a leaf blower to clean our aisles. It definitely goes a lot faster. We have a aisle and it's 72 feet long, so sweeping it would take a very long time. So I always use a leaf blower. But whatever you're going to use, having a tack room is nice because it keeps your tack away from all that dust and debris that gets flying around. But also, if you can have that tack room climate control, it makes it even better because you don't have to worry about, there's just like white mildewy mold that gets on leather often, and you don't really have to worry about that when when you have a tack room where you can close it off and you can keep it in climate control. But that's always not an option for everybody. So the other thing you're going to want to think about is your aisle. Don't skimp on your aisle size. You want at least 12 foot wide on your aisle because it gives you plenty of space for horses to pass by in the aisles if they need to, or your equipment like your tractor, your muck bucket, or even like if you have a manure spreader that's attached to your tractor. It gives you that space that you're going to need to maneuver around your aisle. So those are some basic things you're going to want to think of. So then you can go into detail on what else you might need. So what else you might need? There are a lot of options that we are going to dive into. Some options we'll probably skip. But the other part of the exterior of the barn, the next thing you're going to want to think of is, do you want any extra overhangs? Do you want to cover up your equipment? Do you want to have covered runouts for your horses? Do you want to have exterior stalls, like a shed row type barn? So you're going to want to think about those things if you're doing an aisle style barn. So you can also do a shed row barn where you have, it's exactly what it sounds. It's just a row of stalls and there's a roof over it. And then there's a space in front of the stalls that is also underneath roof. There's that style barn. The most common is definitely going to be your aisle style barn where you can completely close it down and it's got the stalls in there. Another option that people do is just a big open barn space. If they've got a herd of horses that get along really well together and they can all stay together, they'll do maybe like an open style barn where for the most part the horses just get in and get underneath the roof. They might have some closed off sections where they keep the feed and the tack and the grain and everything. So those are some options, but we're going to mainly talk about your traditional barns where you can completely close it down and you've got the stalls going down the sides and then an aisle, or some people start making them like L shapes or T shapes, depending on how many stalls that you're going to put in there and the space that you're using. So that's the other thing. When we're talking about space on a barn, you always want to think about the future. Don't just build for what you have right now because a lot of times things change a little bit. So make sure you've got that space that you think you might need so that you can build it out in the future and you're not having to do a whole new roof system and structure. And if it's just not space that you need right now, just leave it open and empty, even like on a dirt floor. But it's always better to have it than to not have it when you need to finish it. So once you know how many and what you need on the inside, then you can start calculating out the size of your barn. So let's say you're thinking you want, I don't know, let's say 12 stalls, okay? And you do 6 and 6 on each side. And then you want your aisleway. So that's a pretty easy math equation to do. So if you did 12 by 12 stalls and you were doing 6 on each side for 12 stalls, you would have a 72-foot long barn and you would want to go 36 feet wide because you want your stalls to be 12 by 12, which are on each side. And then you're going to want a 12-foot aisle. So that's just a basic, simple layout. So when you do that, you can go ahead and you can do 12 by 12s down one side and you can do 12 by 12s down another side. And then you can take some of those spaces and make it your feed room, your tack room, your wash bay, and do the stalls that you need in there. And then you can do the math from there. So if you think you need 20 stalls, do the math on 20 stalls. And then you can start thinking about, well, would it make more sense if I if I turned and made more of a T-barn or more of a larger square barn where I can do stalls in the center and then stalls on either side. So once you start figuring that stuff out, you can start laying out your barn easier as to where the rooms are going to be. So for example, you want your feed room convenient to feeding your horses. You want your tack room convenient to the wash stall, so that when you've got your horse in the wash stall, the tack room isn't 50 feet away from you. It's as close as it possibly can be. So that is what you're going to want to think about from the beginning on the layout. So then you also want to consider the material that you're going to use for your barn. Some options that people use for exterior is going to be wood. There is some maintenance that is involved with the wood. You're going to have to stain it and paint it every few years. Others options are metal. Metal's great. It's pretty much maintenance free, but it does get damaged if you hit it with the tractor or if a horse kicks it. It will bend. So the other option people use a lot, and these aren't the only options because there is a lot of different options. People sometimes frame their barns and then put siding on, like brick, hardy, and hardy is like a concrete board. But another common option is people will cinder block their barns. So they'll cinder block the outside and then they'll cinder block the stalls. Or some people will do metal on the outside and cinder block the stalls. There's a couple great things about cinder block. One, it is extremely durable. So a horse is not going to take down the wall of a cinder block. Two, it keeps the barn a little bit more cooler in the summer, which in the hotter climates is definitely really nice. So once you know the material you want to use, you'll also want to know the roof pitch that you want to have for your roof, any kind of overhangs that you might want to have to either enclose where you're going to put your tractor and equipment, or an overhang for the horses if you're going to allow them to do runouts from each stall. Then you also want to think about your ventilation, your door layout, window layout, your ridge line on your roof, any cupolas, fans, stuff like that, because you want to have good air circulation in your barn. It's definitely a lot easier in the summertime when you've got all the doors open, but in the wintertime, when you've got everything locked down and all the big doors shut, you want to have that ventilation so you're not walking into your barn and wanting to pass out from the smell of horse urine. So definitely keep in mind the ventilation. So let's get to the fun part, the design aspect of it. So there's a lot of different ways to design your barn and the interior of your barn. After you get the functionality done, safety, make sure you've got your safety in there, like your fire extinguisher. Some people do sprinkler systems. Whatever your safety mechanism is, make sure you have it in there. Some people do cameras. Make sure you do have fire extinguishers in there at least, so that if, God forbid, anything starts to happen, you can at least get it put out, or hopefully get it put out. So with the fun stuff, let's get to the fun stuff, the design part of it. That is so much fun. So there's a lot of different ways to do the inside of your barn. I would say starting with after you figure out your layout of how many stalls you're going to have, where your wash bay is going to be, where your tack room is going to be, where your feed room is going to be, then you can start designing it. So there are many, many ways to do stalls. So you're going to want to figure out, what am I doing? What flows well with me? What's going to function the best? Go on a Pinterest, look at the different ideas. What kind of budget are you working with? Stall fronts can cost anywhere from a few $100s to tens of thousands of dollars. So be mindful of that. And there's also different options that you might want to mix. One of the companies that I really love is American Stalls. They have like really great options. And the option that we did, which I absolutely love, I love the European style. So the European style with stalls is it's got it dips down on each side, and then it has a gate that opens in the center, and it's all open. And that is more on the European style of it. The traditional American style is going to be the stall door is on one side of the stall front, and then it's going to slide, and everything is walled off. So it usually has either solid wood on the bottom and then grates across the top, or a mixture of all different options for that. So I really liked the European style, but I liked also the American style. So what I did was I had gotten these stall gates, which are really cool stall gates that I got from American Stall, and they have that yoke in the front of them where it looks like the European style stall front, but it's on the gate. And I want to say the gate is just over 4 foot tall. So it goes all the way down, and it comes up really high. So and then it's got a place where the horses can stick their heads out. So I contacted a local welder, and I drew out my design of how I wanted my stall fronts, which was basically taking the gate look and then taking it over to the stall front and making it, all of your gates or your doors should be about 4 feet wide. So that leaves you with 8 feet for your stall front. So I drew it out where I wanted it, and it was the open mesh look on the bottom with it's a really strong metal with the open mesh look on the bottom, because that gives a lot of ventilation. And then it's got the European look, but it's up really high. So the only places that the horses can stick their heads out is in the center. So they can't go nose to nose with each other, which is really important to me because I have show horses, and I have mares and geldings and baby horses, all different kinds that are next to each other, and they really don't want to cause unnecessary wall kicking or fighting or anything else that horses love to do. So that is what I did, and because I had a local welder do it, it was super economical. If I would have ordered this style online, it would have probably cost tens of thousands of dollars more. So that's a way to do it. Another option to do is to order the stall kits and then get the wood filler pieces and fill in the stall kits with your wood. But that's what you're going to want to do, is kind of figure out what your budget is, and then a design that you like and how you can achieve that design with what you're working with. So the other thing you're going to want to consider is inside of your stalls. How do you want that function to be? Do you want to have windows that open or that just stay shut? Or do you want to have Dutch doors where you can open the top and the bottom? You also want to take a look at that, because those stall kits can be pretty pricey, and again, it's just the metal that usually comes in the stall kits, and then you have to build it out with the wood. So you're going to want to kind of lay that all out, because you're going to have to design your openings to your Dutch doors and your stall fronts. And sometimes in a barn, if you built a barn that has to have supports in it, you have to know where your openings are going to be for your stall doors, because you're going to have to put posts in the ground and probably in concrete where those stall doors are going to be. So you're going to want to make sure that you know and you have your layout at least drawn out on paper before you do anything that is permanent. So with that, your stalls, you can do all kinds of different things. You definitely want to consider having a fan and a light per stall. So that way, if you have any issues that you need to get in and have a lot of light, you have a light that shines directly in that stall. A fan inside of the stall is nice because it keeps the air circulating, especially in the summertime. If you've got to have a horse up in their stall, it adds a little bit more comfort for them, for sure. And then you also want to think about how you're going to do the flooring for your barn. Some people do just dirt, and that's totally fine. You want to make sure either way the drainage around your barn is correct. So having gutters on your barn and doing like a French drain and making sure that the dirt slopes away from your barn is key. So when you have your stalls, like if you're going to do a dirt floor, you definitely don't want that to be the lowest point where water would run, because it'll be really hard for drainage and it could end up being a disaster. So you want to make sure that there's an escape for the urine. The other option, there's lots of options. Some people like to do concrete. Some people do concrete with drains. A lot of people, if they're doing a concrete or a gravel, then they do the rubber mats over it, or you can do the stall mattresses. Those are always really good options as well. So then you're going to figure out what you're going to do for your flooring, and then also what kind of watering system you're going to have in your stall. Are you going to have automatic waters? Are you going to have just a hose that comes and fills it up? Or another option that people like to do is a spigot on each stall that the horses cannot reach, and you just turn the water valve on and off with it, which is nice, definitely. The automatic waters are nice, but sometimes, well, I don't know about sometimes, I've heard just some scary stories where in the wintertime people have had freezes and then it's burst and then there's water squirting everywhere. So definitely make sure you're thinking about the climate that you live in and that you're building it out the way that you need to build it for your climate. So the other thing you're going to want to think about is how you're going to set up your tack room, which is also really fun, because do you want to make it like a lounge? Do you want to build it and put some trim on the walls and make it kind of relaxing in there? Or do you want it just strictly to function? You're going to want to lay that out. You're going to want to lay out how you want your saddle racks, your bridle bars, and you want to probably have your tack room pretty close to your wash bay, because you don't want to be walking 50 feet from the wash bay when you're ready to tack up your horse or untack your horse for that matter. You want to have convenience. You want to make sure that you're laying out the barn, which makes the function and the flow work really well for you. So, that's another thing to think about when you're getting ready to build your barn. Know how your weather blows in. Know how your sun rises and how your sun sets, because you're going to want to know for how you lay out your barn and where your openings are and where you want your walls to be. So you wouldn't want to build like a shed row and it faces the west where the weather and the wind is blowing in, because that's going to defeat having any shelter, because it's just going to come right at them. So make sure that you pay attention to the climate that you're in and which way the wind blows and where east and west is for you when you lay out your barn. Definitely really important. And make sure that your barn is on the highest point in that particular spot where your barn is, so that water again drains away from it. I cannot express that enough. If you have your barn sitting below the grade, and even if it's slightly, and the water will go into the barn, it will get under the stall mats. It just will always be a mess. So make sure you are paying attention to those things. So then you got to figure out, okay, now I've got my layout, I have my stall design, I've got my barn facing the right way so the weather's not going to take us down. You're going to want to think about what kind of finishes you want. So this is where things can get really fancy or not get fancy. So you can do finishes inside of your barn, which would be things like finishing out the walls and the ceilings. And some people use the metal, which I think looks super classy and it looks really sharp, where they're taking the metal that they use on the exterior of the barn, and then they are putting it inside of the barn, and they're doing it on the ceilings, and then they're doing it where it comes down the wall and it goes to where the back of the stall wall is. So like you'll have your wood wall come up on the back and then it will meet the metal, which it looks very sharp. And then they're doing the metal in the wash bays. So that's an option. Another option is to do the tongue and groove and then stain everything. Or some people do T11 boards, which is a look that looks like tongue and groove, but it's actually sheets of like a plywood where it's a 4x8 and you just hang these sheets up rather than doing the individual tongue and groove pieces. And it's definitely a little bit more affordable of a way to go. And then you can add some unique touches that I've seen in the aisles, which is pretty cool. Like doing like a row of chandeliers. It just gives the aesthetic of just like that little bit more of a finishing touch without being astronomically more of a finishing touch. And then also your barn doors is something really important to think about. Are you going to have the sliding doors? Are you going to have a garage door? All those things that you're going to want to figure out when designing your barn. So I have attached I've attached a link with a resource for you guys. It is a downloadable guide on how to design a barn for you and some checklists. It's totally free. It's just something that I thought would be very useful. So to kind of give you a starting point when you are designing and laying out your barn, kind of like a checklist. Remember, perfection is in the details. So you're going to want to make sure you are paying attention to the little things that end up being big things, like the drains and then where the drains are going to, the gutters and where they're taking the water to. You want to make sure that you're not creating problems by trying to prevent problems. So that's definitely going to be some tips that I could recommend when designing a barn and the layout of the barn. When it comes to the aesthetics and the colors of the barn, most people want to stick with about 3 colors. It makes everything kind of match really well. So, 3 color choices that are pretty common are white barns, and then like a stain color. A lot of people are also doing black barns right now. So, there are endless amount of options of what you can choose. A lot of people will choose to match their barns with their house exterior or any other structures that they may have on their property. So the other thing you're going to want to consider, especially if you're building a barn on a property that has not had a barn yet, you want to look at it from an aerial view of what does your property look like, what makes the most sense as to the location of the barn. You want the barn far enough away from the house where, you don't feel like your house is on top of your barn. We also want to make sure that you can get to the barn in a timely manner should there be an emergency. So you also want to make sure that if you're going to have pastures or runouts, that you have your barn in the optimal spot for pasture use or runout use, that you don't have it in some weird spot that then makes it weird or you to have pastures that are all cut up or not the way you'd want the pastures. So it's important to look at it from a bird's eye view and then design it out, lay it out where it functions the best for you and what you're using your barn for or your horses for. I'd love to hear from you guys. How did you design your barns? What are some tips that you have? This is a new podcast. This is only episode 2, so we are building it up from the ground. Please subscribe and leave comments. Share us with your friends. Tell everybody about us. Everything we talk about has to do with horses and horse farms, horse properties. We're going to be giving tips and bringing lots of other people on here. I hope you enjoyed the tips that I gave about designing and building out your dream horse barn. I'm going to have a downloadable link, like I said, attached where it is a guide for designing your barn. It's going to have checklists and just some parameters that you can use as a guideline for building out your barn. And then we'd love to hear from you. Please, like I said, leave us comments, tell us about your barn choices, tell us about your barn projects, and stay tuned for episode 3. It is going to be about how to make money with your horse farm, from running events to boarding training. There's definitely a few options out there. So please subscribe, and thank you for listening.